Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. Hey, Jess, how's your week been?
Been pretty good. It's been very busy. We were talking about this just before the pod started, but I am visiting family in my hometown this week. And I always think it's going to be a lot more relaxing than it actually is. Because you just have to cram like seeing so many people. And so I've just been running around like a chicken with its head cut off the last couple of days. And I was like, oh, it's going to be great. I'm going to be so chill and I'll have all this time to catch up on things.
Never works that way.
That is not happened.
Now you need a vacation from
now
your
vacation. Now I need a vacation from my vacation. That is exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to get back to London on Tuesday and I'm going to be like, I don't want to see or talk to anyone for a week while I like decompress.
There is nothing better than a staycation. That's like one of life's pure joys.
I am looking forward to my staycation.
Well, my week has been a lot less exciting. The only thing I really have to report on is had a little bit of a boys' movie night, and one of my friends watched Transformers for the first time. Don't know how he got away from watching that all these years, but I will say the movie holds up. It's pretty good, actually.
Does it?
Well, I mean, look, I will say, I think that starting with Transformers and for the next 10 years, that was like peak CGI. That was as good as it's ever going to get. The budgets were unlimited. And the CGI
Michael Bay loved an explosion, CGI explosion.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't? My favorite Transformers memory, you probably remember this as well, is one year when we were at CinemaCon, we were in the front row at the Paramount presentation. Do you remember this? And they were doing like Transformers 7 or whatever it was. And I just remember, for unknown reasons, probably because he needed the money, Anthony Hopkins, Anthony Hopkins was in that particular Transformers movie. And I just remember one of the other guys on stage, like some young American kid, kept calling him T-Hops. And you could just see
his soul leaving his body. Yeah.
His soul leaving his body every time this kid called him T-Hops. Yeah. And it's like, that, sir, that is Hannibal Lecter that you are talking to right now. I wouldn't run the risk.
Great casting decision.
Oh my God. He clearly needed the money for like a new pool or whatever, but it was very, Anyway, let's get into it. So before we dive in, quick housekeeping. We're obviously still getting amazing responses to our social media content. But anyway, so as a reminder, we have social media. You can find us at early_adopter on all platforms. Remember, there's no E in the adopter. We're on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all the social medias. Okay, so Kyle, I have to ask, when most people hear AI, they think ChatGPT or they think Claude, these massive models that are really like in the public mindset. But today we're going to talk about something completely different, aren't we?
Absolutely. We are talking about something a little different today. And so I want to think of it like this. If ChatGPT is like hiring a Harvard PhD who knows everything about anything, small language models, which is what we're going to be covering today, are like hiring a really brilliant specialist who knows your business inside and out. And for most small business tasks, that specialist is actually better and going to be way more affordable.
And the thing that I really love about small language models, and we'll get into what those are shortly, is that they're really accessible. And in fact, some of the tools that we'll be talking about today can be set up with in 15 minutes with very little or no coding experience. But first, before we get into all of that, let's talk about what they actually are and why our listeners should care about them.
Let's start with a picture in your head. So imagine you've got a huge, heavy sledgehammer. Amazing if you're going to break down a wall, but probably the wrong thing if you're trying to hang a picture frame. That's the difference between a massive large language model and a small language model, or SLM. So SLMs are kind of the right size tool for very specific jobs. They're compact, efficient, and built for focused tasks.
I think that's a really great analogy because I immediately was able to envision that in my head. As someone who's hung many pictures in my life.
I mean, look, and I love a sledgehammer and I love doing demo, but definitely not using a sledgehammer to hang a picture frame or screw in a TV.
No, definitely not. But I think one of the first questions that everyone's going to be asking is, when you say small in the small language model, are we talking about small as in less capable? Because I think that that's a really important question.
Yeah. When we say small, we're talking about the number of parameters. And this is the internal learning weights, which can sound a little techie, but kind of to put this in reference, a large language model might have hundreds or of billions of these parameters. That's like the amount of training data. Whereas a small language model might have a few billion. The key is that smaller doesn't mean worse. It just means focused and very highly tuned.
So to put it into context that our listeners might understand, it's like the difference between a general practitioner, so someone who's got expertise in a lot of different things, and a heart surgeon. So the heart surgeon might know less about treating a sprained ankle, but if you need heart surgery, you're going to want the specialist, not the generalist.
Exactly. And that focus brings massive advantages for small businesses. First up is cost. We're talking AI that can run on your laptop or even like a modest server. So not some supercomputer in the cloud with massive storage implications.
But what can these smaller models actually do? Because I'm guessing that they're probably not going to write the next great American novel.
Right. Yeah, they're not writing War and Peace. But for most business tasks, they're brilliant. So think customer support chatbots that handle 90% of your frequently asked questions. Content creation that's highly tuned to your writing style. So social posts, product descriptions, email newsletters. We've talked about how content generation can be really great. Small language models are actually really useful for that if you fine tune it on your writing samples. Another great example is data analysis. So if you want to summarize reports or extract key points from customer feedback, organize information, that can be really useful. I think that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Internal knowledge bases. So a new hire can ask an AI about your company policies instead of interrupting you. Another great example is task automation. So AI reading your emails, drafting quick replies. A lot of the examples that we've talked about in the past can be really utilized well using small language models if you do a little bit of fine tuning on your specific use case. You could even use it for multilingual support if you've got international customers.
Okay, before we go any deeper, I've been hearing open source and open weight thrown around with these models. So can you explain what the difference is to us? Because I think that's quite important to know.
Great question. And this sometimes can get a little bit into the developer world, but we'll kind of break this down really quickly just so you understand the difference. Because open source is a word that we hear a lot. So in this instance, open source means the model's architecture and training code are public. So you can inspect, change, or even retrain it. Whereas open weight means you can download and run the pre-trained model as is, but you don't necessarily get all the training data or code. So for most small businesses, or for if you're trying to put these into action now, open weight is going to be enough. And that's a really important difference and helpful in this instance. So you can still fine tune it for your needs or for your writing style without having to reinvent the wheel and have like access to a lot of processing power. So open source gives you a lot of flexibility if you want to deeply customize it, but that's probably, again, a little bit of overkill. You can probably just take one of these open weight models and utilize it.
So a little bit like going back to our sledgehammer versus a regular hammer analogy. I think that explains it nicely. But both of the options, open weight and open source, make small language models more accessible.
Yeah. And to kind of give you an example where I think this can get really fun. So I used a small open weight model from Meta called Olama. Um, and I fine tuned it on a bunch of company emails so it could analyze sentiment and break down details like seniority of the sender, the department that they were in, identify the urgency of the conversation and some recurring topics, and built kind of like an email analyzer. So, and I did this with a really clear prompt structure. So the output was exactly what I needed it for reporting. And the beauty of all of this is that I was actually able to run it locally and process tens of thousands of emails very quickly for my very specific task. I didn't have to send a single bit of this out to ChatGPT or have to use like all of the tokens that would have cost me using GPT-5 or something like that.
I think that's really clever, and it really, if you have any concerns about privacy, and I know we'll talk more about this, but I think that ability to keep things local on your own computer or whatever the case may be is going to be very important and helpful for anyone who's looking to use these.
Yeah, there's a couple really important distinctions of why you would use this SLM in this example versus an LLM. Privacy is a great one. So you don't send any sensitive data to an external cloud provider. But cost is a really big one. And I think, as we're talking about, how does a small business utilize the tools that used to only be available for enterprise? SLMs can really bridge that gap from a cost perspective. Analyzing thousands of emails using GPT-4, GPT-5 would have been incredibly expensive. But this basically cost me nothing using the small language model because I downloaded it to my local computer, analyzed it, and ran it here locally. Also, from a speed perspective, the SLMs respond, in seconds, because there's less reasoning overhead required. And then again, using the fine tuning, I was able to really customize it for my niche use case. So it was very useful. So I think for about 80% of business automation, like the screwdriver or the SLM is a better fit than swinging the sledgehammer. And I think a quick pro tip, you can run a sample of your SLM's inputs and outputs through a large language model to spot errors or tricky edge cases it struggled with, and then use the LLM's explanation to refine and retrain your SLM, making it sharper over time without sacrificing some of the speed or efficiency. So you can do some pretty clever things here with SLMs.
And I think what I love the most about this is that SLMs are often perfect for the tasks that we talk about a lot, the ones that really eat up your time. But let's have a little bit of a chat about what the downsides are, because there's always a catch, right? Like these sound great on paper, but there's always a downside. So what is it in this instance?
Yeah, the main trade-off is complexity. So if you need deep multi-domain reasoning, or you need a lot of those features that you get off the shelf from ChatGPT and Claude, like web search, deep research is a great example. Or if you need to do like highly creative work that's drawing on a lot of different domains, think like writing a legal brief or inventing an entire ad campaign from scratch. A big model is going to win every time. So the key, as we talk about, is matching the tool to the job, matching when you need a sledgehammer and when you need a screwdriver. A great example is that you're not going to use a sledgehammer to fix a watch. So, that's the same thing for SLM and an LLM.
So I also imagine that there's a bit of a quality question involved with this as well. So we want to make sure that we're, are we talking about AI that sounds really robotic or unnatural? So if we're talking smaller, is the tone affected by the smaller aspect?
Yeah, some small language models can be less polished out of the box. There's a lot less parameters. It's had a lot less training data. So it doesn't, as its pattern recognition tries to identify which words, it just doesn't have as much of a catalog to draw from. So it is smart to keep a human in the loop early on. But for most business communication, you want clarity and accuracy, not poetry, not War and Peace. So you can use the AI for the heavy lifting, and then you do the final pass. And again, great time to fine tune some of your early writing samples so you give it more of the training data that it needs to make it more relevant and more personalized.
And we always talk about having a human in the loop anyway to refine and to review things. And so I don't think like none of that changes. That strategy doesn't change. We would suggest that for an LLM as well. So this is just being consistent. And you should always have a human looking at what the content, what the output is.
I think it's getting really popular these days to talk about how AI is replacing or can do everything for you. I think we're pretty consistent in our messaging that AI assists what you're already doing. So again, going back to that ethos, start with an AI assisted workflow, not looking at AI replacement workflows. SLMs are great for assisting. Let the AI or the small language model handle the first draft, then you polish it. Let it analyze or categorize your emails with a really good, prompt. Go back to our prompt engineering examples, and then you can review the analysis and the categories and fine tune that and work on it. So it's all about augmenting your processes or your team, not replacing them.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. But I think here's what I really want to know, because this actually does sound more technical than we normally get into. And I know that that's one of our, big things, is that we want to make this sort of stuff accessible for anyone to be able to use. So like, how do they actually get started with this? Because this does sound very complicated as we're talking about it.
And look, my example that I gave is a little technical, right? I downloaded the open source model. I ran it locally. I'm using code to do all that. And I can see how that would put people off. But I think where it gets really exciting, there are a lot of no code tools that are perfect this sort of thing that are popping up. There are tools now where you can literally drag and drop your FAQ document and boom, you have a working chatbot on a small language model that doesn't require any programming, and you can connect to it or put it on your website.
That sounds great, and a little more accessible than I think what you the example.
Yeah.
But then you are more technical, so But let's now look at a more concrete example. So let's say that I run a small e-commerce business that sells handmade soaps. Like, how could I use an SLM for that particular use case?
It's a perfect example. And let's talk about one of those no-code tools. So a great tool that you could use is something called Chatbase. I think we'll put in the show notes a link to their website. You upload your FAQ document or just paste in your product information, and you can customize the chatbot's name. You can define its tone, how you want it to respond. Call it Soap Helper Sarah or something like that, right? Anything to make it a little bit more conversational, human. Set the tone to friendly but informative. Then you can copy literally one line of code and paste it into your website. And this will take all of maybe 30 minutes. This is no different than taking like a little bit of code from like your HubSpot and putting it in your website, or your Google Analytics code and putting it on your website and injects it to all the pages. So this, I think, is definitely within the realm of no code.
And I think any tool that you use will have steps to walk you through that process. So it's not like you're doing it completely blind. And as you say, if you've ever put Google Analytics code onto your website, the steps, or you just send it off to your developer, whatever the case may be. So don't be put off by that one line of code element to it.
Also, quick pro tip, ask ChatGPT how to do it.
Yeah.
It's actually really good at like showing you instructions and then helping you debug if you need to insert, code into your website.
Perfect. So then what does the output look like? Like, what then happens when a customer would visit my e-commerce soap site?
Yeah, you've probably seen this, in the real world quite a bit. You see a little chat bubble at the bottom right. So when you click on that, you can ask it, do you have unscented soaps? What should I use if I have, sensitive skin? Something like that. If your FAQs and your product documentation has this information, the AI will know your product line, respond with the right products, maybe even suggest complementary items. So it's like having a knowledgeable shop assistant available 24/7.
I think that's a really good use case, because honestly, that will cut out immediately, probably 75% of the inquiries that you get, where it's just very easy, simple stuff that you personally don't need to answer. And if you've ever done customer support or anything like that, that can be, 95% of your time just answering questions.
Yeah, and you're going to lose that customer otherwise. You have to really match that intent. So you need to be responding quickly if you're going to keep them on your site and keep them engaged. You don't want them to send a support ticket and then you respond 24 hours later. They're gone. They're doing something else, so they bought it somewhere else.
100%. I mean, that is the problem with smaller businesses or startups, is that you do it because you love it, or because you want more of a work-life balance, and then it just ends up taking over.
I remember when you and I were answering support tickets.
Oh, God, that was Awful.
That was brutal. And that's when you learn how mean people can be online.
Yes.
The meanest things. Even then you would talk to someone in person, lovely human,
Yeah.
wonderful, not mean at all. But sometimes the way people write is just mean.
It's so true.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what about some other use cases that aren't just customer support? Because that is just one piece of the puzzle. So what about something like data analysis? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
often startups or smaller businesses are just drowning in information and in data, but they obviously you don't have a data analyst on staff.
Yeah.
That's a pretty niche role, but also that data is incredibly important to help you grow the
Yeah.
business. So what does it look like for something like data analysis?
Yeah, this is where small models shine. So, if you were to have like 200 customer reviews, and that's way too many to read line by line, especially if you're getting this volume every month.
Yeah.
If you feed them to a small model, in seconds, it can highlight trends. It can look at how many people talk about shipping or how many people complain about packaging. It can really help you identify product improvements or recommendations. You know where to double down, where to improve in minutes instead of hours. A quick little check on this LLM versus SLM. So the SLM, if you have a clear analysis that you want to do, the SLM is going to be great and it's going to process that very quickly. If you're trying to do more like open analysis because you don't know what to ask, maybe you switch to an LLM because you want that deeper reasoning. But for most analysis where you're really trying to identify trends, an SLM is great.
And honestly, that's gold for a smaller business owner because that's exactly the sort of thing that you need to be able to deep dive into that you might not have the expertise to get into. But I also think it's important to talk about the elephant in the room. We alluded to this earlier. Privacy and security, because as always, if I'm feeding my customer data or sensitive business information into these systems, is that something that I should be concerned about? Should I what do I need to be aware of in that sort of situation?
Yeah. It's one of the biggest perks of small models. Many can run entirely on your own laptop or on like a small little server that doesn't cost too much. And then your data never leaves the building. So compare that to ChatGPT, where everything goes to OpenAI servers. And we've waved the be careful flag on that before. I think we've talked about it quite a bit.
Yeah.
But with a local SLM, you keep control, you reduce the risk, and you're staying compliant without extra hoops. That compliance piece might be really relevant to some businesses if you're trying to stay SOC 2 or ISO 27001 compliant. These SLMs might allow you to do that a lot easier because you don't have to talk about a separate, sub-processor.
And I know that's something like when I've done workshops around kind of the basics of AI, that was one of the immediate questions is like, how much should I be putting up my sensitive company information into a ChatGPT? So as an SLM is kind of the perfect antidote to that, especially for businesses or for anyone handling really sensitive information, whether healthcare or legal or financial services. Like this could absolutely be a game changer for those sorts of businesses.
Yeah, I'm not going to name any names, but I did recently hear about a very large company. They released their own company-wide AI product, but they told their employees not to put any sensitive business information in it. And so very quickly, you come to the realize that, they're just using ChatGPT with an API. Not a great use case, not very helpful to call that your company-wide AI. This is one of those instances where now this company could probably afford to have an open source LLM, but might be a great use case for an SLM, for very company-specific tasks or for specific domains and functions. Another great example of this, like definitely in the space of healthcare.
Yeah.
So you really have to worry about patient information, HIPAA compliance. So a healthcare clinic could use a small local model to help with appointment scheduling, basic patient inquiries, or note taking when you're having conversations with the patient. None of that patient data would get sent to a third party. It would all stay secure and private. So again, you can continue to be HIPAA compliant. It's going to make your privacy compliance a lot easier.
And in an instance like that, what about costs? Because I know we touched on this earlier, but let's get into a little bit of the details of how, what that looks like in terms of cost.
Yeah, the numbers can be really compelling there. Let's say you are a little bit more technical and you download one of these open weight models and run it locally on a server. It's going to be very cheap. That's just going to be the cost of that server running and processing questions. But even many of these no code tools start for free or under like $20 a month. Compare that to enterprise AI solutions. They're going to cost thousands, tens of thousands, and the implementations of those, can get up into the millions. So if you go the local route, you might just pay a one-time setup cost and then, run it on your hardware or, in the cloud very cheaply.
So we're basically talking about a language model that is accessible to, your local restaurant, not just a Fortune 500 company, which is great. That's exactly the sort of thing that we support and we want, why we think that these are really helpful for a startup or for a smaller business.
These small models totally level the playing field. So a 10-person company can now offer 24/7 customer support, like we talked about, which could rival what a 10,000-person company offers with outsourced people to handle all this. You can produce content at scale, again, that's personalized to the way you talk. You can analyze data thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of row very intelligently and automate routine tasks. So it can be a real game changer. And kind of on like a fun little bit, you can be like, hey, I have my own AI that's completely personalized to myself. Sounds pretty cool.
It's essentially like having a team of, really smart assistants or interns, as we always talk about our infinite intern analogy, without the salary and the benefit costs, which obviously could be prohibitively expensive for. I mean, look, we're hearing stories about data scientists who, understand AI and machine learning getting 6-7 figure salaries. So, that's
or
not.
If you work at OpenAI, billions of dollars.
Or billions. Yeah, exactly. So, that is not to everyone. But I think it's still worth making sure that we're being realistic here. Like, we always like to talk about the pros of AI, but also the cons. So what should people watch out for?
I think we talk about this a lot. It's definitely true here, as it is with everything else. Accuracy matters. So always test thoroughly before going live, especially on some of those edge cases. That's where productionized AI models can sometimes fall down. So review the work yourself or have a human review the AI work, especially early on. Set clear boundaries. If the AI doesn't know something, it should say so rather than making things up. Since there's a lot less training data, a lot less ability to reason, AI hallucinations can be more prevalent here. And remember, the AI is a tool. It's not a magic solution. So you still need the strategy, the oversight, the human judgment, all those things that Sean was talking about. You still need all of that.
And I really imagine it's about, as we always say, you start small and then you scale it over time. It's not something that you jump into, with both feet immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. Pick a specific use case, find that one automation or workflow you want to, take away from having to do manually, get that working well, learn from it, and then expand to other areas. A small language model isn't going to AI-ify your entire business on day one. It's really built for those specific tasks. But as we're finding with AI tools and kind of as we think about agents and whatnot, it's those specific tasks that actually can really help you unlock, your productivity and your opportunities. So here's how I'd break it down into like a quick start framework if you wanted to start, getting up to speed with SLMs really quickly. Like identify one repetitive time-consuming task. Pick the right tool. This could be chat-based. I think we'll put in the notes some other ones. There's a lot of different options.
Yeah.
If you're a little bit more technical, maybe you can pull, Olama or Mistral models for privacy sensitive work onto your local computer. Then prototype fast. So add in one document into your no code setup just to kind of test it really quickly. And then, test it with real users, other people in your business, friends and family, and then refine the output so that it works well. And then start to expand gradually. And then maybe if you're using a chatbot, put it on your website. So start small, measure impact, and then scale.
So to sum it up, small language models are like hiring a really good specialist instead of an expensive generalist. They're really cost effective. They can run locally which is great from a privacy perspective. They're perfect for really repetitive business tasks, and you can get started without any technical skills. So they sound pretty ideal, to be honest.
Yeah, and the timing couldn't be better. So these tools are improving every month. The small businesses that are experimenting now, they're going to be miles ahead of the people who are just thinking about it, a year from now or 18 months from now.
And obviously, if you ever have any questions about something like a small language model or how to get started, feel free to drop us a note because we're always happy to chat about that. But this is also good timing because we need to talk about some massive AI news that just dropped. It's kind of the opposite of a small language model.
Yeah.
So, we've been talking about really small focused AI models, but this week, the whole AI world got turned upside down by something absolutely huge, which was that OpenAI just announced the launch of their GPT-5. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, everywhere. It was everywhere. On LinkedIn, everyone was talking about GPT-5. Reddit was going crazy about it. I mean, you could not escape the news.
Reddit really, we always say this. Reddit always has a lot of opinions. They really had some opinions about GPT-5.
100%. And look, I mean, this is like Apple announcing a new iPhone that also makes coffee and does your taxes, right? So it's not just an incremental update. It's a game changer in some ways.
Yeah, and I think there's a really interesting twist with this, and it actually connects directly to our chat about small language models, is that GPT-5 isn't one single giant model. It's a system that swaps between a fast, lightweight model and the kind of more heavyweight, deep thinking model, depending on what your request is. So depending on what your prompt is that goes in, it will respond with a different model, which is really interesting.
Exactly. And this is quite a buzzy term here, but OpenAI calls it a heterogeneous agentic system.
Oof, that's a mouthful.
Seriously. And really, that's just a fancy way to say that there's some AI teamwork going on in the background. So if you ask it a simple question, like what's the weather, it's going to use the fast model and give you a really quick answer. But if you ask it to solve a complex coding problem or something that requires that deeper reasoning, it just switches to the thinking model. It determines what use case or what the question is, and then uses the right model accordingly. So it kind of chooses for you.
So it's essentially doing the choice between the sledgehammer and the screwdriver for you, which is actually great. It means that you don't need to be doing that yourself. And what we're seeing is that the performance improvements are actually pretty impressive. So in coding, it scored 74.9% on something called the SWE Bench Verified, which is a really hard coding test. And then they also showed off some pretty wild demos. So it can also now access Gmail and Google Calendar directly. So you could say, plan a team dinner for next Thursday and email the invites. And then it actually does that. It checks everyone's calendar. It finds time that works. It books a restaurant. It sends emails. Although, as we saw last week when we were talking about ChatGPT agent, you might want to do a little bit of testing, maybe, consider before you allow it access to your emails, shall we say.
Spot on.
Yeah.
And I will say from personal experience that the coding element of GPT-5 is pretty incredible. I mean, there's been a lot of advancements over the last few months with Claude Code, Gemini as well. These models are getting really good at doing coding. It built some pretty impressive classes and functions and structures and whatnot. So I can basically say that, you could give it a prompt with what your objective is, and it could build out everything for you and then run that code. So it's quite good. I saw another demo where someone asked it to build a complete French learning website, and it coded the entire thing from scratch, tested it, fixed bugs, and then deployed it live all in about 10 minutes. I mean, that's pretty incredible. That's the kind of thing that used to take a development team, I was going to say weeks, but really like months. So this is pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, the kind of general consensus that I've been hearing a lot of is that the coding is incredible. It's not great with the writing, but they really there's a little bit of chat going on about, no pun intended, some chat going on about the coding tools and the coding tool wars, because they're really starting to get incredibly competitive. So I think that that's really where they put a lot of effort in, was to improve the coding elements of GPT-5. But I think let's, bring it back to reality for our listeners. I think if you're running a smaller business or a startup, should you care about GPT-5 or should you just stick with the smaller language models that we've been talking about? Because we've just spent, a half an hour talking about how great these SLMs are. So what's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, that could be the $1 million question, right? I would say GPT-5 is incredibly powerful, but it's also going to be expensive. So early reports suggest API pricing starts at like $1.25 per thousand input tokens and $10 per thousand output tokens. So for our audience, maybe you're not using the APIs, maybe that is just gibberish that means nothing to you. But just for kind of reference, that for heavy usage, that is going to be very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So, but speaking of SLMs, to kind of bring it back to our talk today, OpenAI didn't just drop GPT-5 this week. They also launched their first ever open weight small models. So exactly what we're talking about. These have very technical terms, but they have a 120 billion parameter one and a 20 billion parameter, which is quite small, but pretty impressive to be done.
It's actually the first time in years that they've actually given the public full access to a model's weight. So it means that you can download them, run them locally, fine tune them for your own tasks. So that means no API calls, no vendor lock-ins. Like, this is actually really exciting.
Absolutely. So don't have to worry about those massive GPT-5 costs if you don't need to. Because that smaller one, the 20 billion parameter one, can run probably on a decent, 16 gigabyte laptop, which is probably what most people have. The bigger one is going to be closer in performance to OpenAI's O4 mini model, but you're going to need probably a little bit more serious hardware. So it's probably a little out of touch for most people. Both are released under, the Apache open source 2.0 license. So businesses can also use them commercially without paying usage fees. So if you are really trying to level up on this and do some really specific tasks or put it on your website, I mean, you get access to really sophisticated tools for no additional variable cost.
And this is actually why we keep talking about the SLMs and why we kind of wanted to do an episode on this, because ChatGPT 5 might be really powerful, but it's pricey. It can be unpredictable. There are obviously, we've talked about it extensively, some concerns with ChatGPT and OpenAI in general. And, with these open weight SLMs, you've got a tool that is cheaper, it's private, it's more controllable. So, and I think that is why we wanted to continue talking about this, even with, something like the big news of this ChatGPT 5 launch.
Yeah, it's back to our specialist versus generalist analogy. If you need to occasionally solve really complex problems, GPT-5 might be worth it, but most of the time, probably not. If you need an AI to answer your customer questions or very task-specific questions, a small model is probably going to be smarter financially. I think about it when you're, to use a golf analogy, when you're buying golf clubs, you can buy the latest, newest blade technology for thousands of dollars and right size it for yourself. Or, you could probably buy the same things that were from 2 or 3 years ago, and they're going to work just as well for your average golfer. These small language models probably work or are better than the original GPT models from a couple of years ago, which were really impressive.
Yeah.
So for most of us, this is going to be plenty. It's going to be totally enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, where it gets really interesting, is that OpenAI is clearly moving towards this multimodal approach internally. And I think we're going to see more companies offering this kind of AI team setup where you get small models for routine tasks and then you have the big models for complex problems. I think that just really, really makes sense. And it's like having different employees for different jobs. And, we were just talking about something of this nature earlier about using someone with the right skills for the right job. Otherwise, you're just wasting everyone's time.
Even OpenAI recognizes that you don't need massive AI power for every task. And I think this fits into a lot of what we talked about a few weeks ago about AI usage. It validates our conversation about small models, finding the right tool for the right task.
Yeah. As we alluded to earlier, though, we do need to talk about the feedback because, GPT-5 sounds amazing on paper, but people have had a chance to really dig into it, and the actual user reaction has not been great, particularly over on Reddit. You can take everything that Reddit says with a grain of salt, but there is a Reddit thread that is actually called GPT-5 is horrible, and it has over 4,000 upvotes. So, that's not just like a small sample.
Yeah. That's not just trolling. Personally, I have not experienced as much hate or as, I'm not as negative about it. Some users have reported that GPT-5 gives shorter, less helpful responses, feels more robotic.
Mm.
And I think the kicker for most of us here, ChatGPT Plus users are now limited to just 200 messages per week with GPT-5. So you are seeing these big companies starting to tighten and restrict the usage. For some of you, that might be hitting the limit in about an hour, right?
I mean, I've been noticing that myself with Claude recently, as I am definitely hitting its limits. Especially there was some stuff that I was working on this week that I was really leaning heavily into Claude. And I actually had to start 3 different chats just to keep the conversation going, because I really needed some support with it. But actually that is what concerns me the most about it for, a smaller business or for a startup, is that the pricing is just going to start to get way more complicated than it appears. And you're gonna end up spending more money. Like I'm already thinking, obviously this is not chat, but like I'm already thinking, well, I'm a Claude Pro user right now. Like maybe I need to upgrade to Max, which actually, it starts to add up. With GPT-5, like the headline rate is $1.25 per million tokens. And that sounds cheap, but there are a lot of these like hidden reasoning tokens, and that can multiply your costs by 5 times what you expect really quickly.
Yeah, a simple coding task that looks like it should cost $5 might actually cost 25 because of all of the invisible thinking that is doing behind the scenes. And you don't really have a lot of control over that. You ask it the question, you give it the prompt, but you can't really, limit its, input and output reasoning. So, if businesses can't predict these costs, they're going to be at the mercy of these companies and how AI processes each request.
And, if you want guaranteed access to the full GPT-5 model, you're going to need the Pro subscription, which is over $150 a month. And that's, 8 times more expensive than the Plus plan, which most people are on. And so for most, smaller businesses or startups, that's just not feasible for everyone within the business that's going to need to use it. So that's a concern as well.
Yeah, another red flag, and one that I really don't like, is that OpenAI removed access to some of the older models that people were using successfully. So users who had workflows built around GPT-4o models suddenly found themselves forced to use a new system that may be worse for their specific needs. So that lack of backwards compatibility is actually really frustrating from a developer standpoint.
And that is, I think, one of the big reasons why you had so much backlash on Reddit, because a lot of people will have used that to build various things, and they just basically had the rug pulled out from underneath them. And this is exactly why we've been talking about small language models and local alternatives, because as we've talked about in the past, when you're completely dependent on one vendor like ChatGPT, you're really at their mercy for everything, for pricing changes. If they remove a feature, if they redesign the systems, like it can actually really screw you over.
Yeah, let's talk about the performance. Many users are reporting that GPT-5 is significantly slower than previous models, even for simple tasks. So, I don't know if you've noticed this on GPT-5, but if you ask a very complicated question, it'll kind of churn for a while, and you can click on ask for the quicker question. That's how you can trigger it to go towards the simple task. Even Sam Altman himself admitted that the auto switching system broke during launch, making GPT-5 seem way dumber than previous models.
It's always the problem with live demos. Never do a live
demo.
Oh
my God.
Goes wrong.
Live demos keep me up at night.
Oh, every single time. It's guaranteed. So I think the bottom line on GPT-5 is that it might technically be impressive, but, for a smaller business owner or for a startup or for a founder, it can be expensive. It can be a little unpredictable. You might not be able to rely on it staying exactly the same for the foreseeable future while they kind of iron out bugs. And this is why starting out with a smaller, more controllable AI tool makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so to bring it back around, most of the tasks we've talked about today, customer support, content creation, data analysis, they work perfectly well with much simpler and cheaper models. So you may not need to pay premium prices for AI that's overkill or a sledgehammer in this case. And I wonder, as we go along, are we going to start to see the kind of people picking up these smaller language models, hosting them themselves for their everyday tasks rather than relying on, the large AI companies, which are starting to price gouge a little bit on usage.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think that segues nicely into another major AI story this week that kind of is the complete opposite of these really
Mhm.
corporate closed door approaches. And that is that Switzerland, the country, has just announced that they are releasing a fully open source language model that addresses a lot of the concerns that people have about AI. So this is very cool and very interesting. And I think great timing to talk about off the back of the ChatGPT 5 announcement.
Brilliant timing. And I'm so excited about this. I think this is such a huge announcement and a really, great step forward. So, ETH Zurich and EPFL are releasing a large language model that's completely open. So source code, training data, everything, not just open weight, it's open source. And it's multilingual in over 1,000 languages.
I think that is so cool and it really helps from a localization perspective. But I also I really love the philosophy behind this because it
Mhm.
means that instead of AI being, developed behind closed doors by big tech companies, which a lot of people have issues with, understandably, this is being built by public universities using
Mhm.
public infrastructure with really transparent data practices, which is very cool. They are making everything available so that anyone can see it. It's really like the difference between, a
Mhm.
secret family recipe that only one person knows the answer to, or an open cookbook.
Yeah, I think they've done everything right here. And I think it's a great model for how, other nations or other companies can, build a lot of transparency. They're using the Alps supercomputer in Switzerland. So it's one of the world's most advanced AI platforms. It's running on 100% carbon neutral electricity.
That's
So it's
awesome.
not, which is so great. Going back to our talk about, energy usage. So this isn't just open, it's environmentally responsible too. And I know that's a big concern for a lot of people and
Huge concern.
rightfully
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. And what's really interesting for a smaller business or for a startup is that they're releasing it in two sizes. So 8 billion and 70 billion parameters. We were just talking about what those mean, but that smaller 8 billion
Mhm.
parameter version, and that's exactly the type of small language model that we've been talking about today. So it's great because you've got the option between the smaller
Mhm.
and the larger.
Yeah, that's the size that you could run locally on your computer or on a very small server. It's fully open source under an Apache 2.0 license. So, you could, as a small business or as a startup, run this locally, customize it for your needs, fine tune it on some of your documents, and then never have to worry about vendor lock in, usage fees. It is really like having your own AI that you actually own.
It's really huge for addressing some of these ethical concerns that we've talked about. We love to talk about the pros, but there are absolutely cons. And, we
Mhm.
acknowledge those cons. And, when the training data is transparent, when the source code is open, when it's developed by public institutions rather than a profit driven corporation, you
Mhm.
get really different incentives. And it's a great path forward
Yeah.
for other models as well.
Yeah, because remember, even the open weight models you're able to pull down, you don't know how it's been trained or what the parameters are. So it's still a little bit of a closed box.
Yeah.
Um, I'd also say the multilingual aspect is game changing because now you can serve over 1,000 languages, right? So that's not just your core English, Spanish, French, whatever. I mean, that's global AI, which could give you access to markets that you never thought you could.
Yeah, and I think there's some really interesting stuff around being able to localize into different customs and,
Mhm.
because everyone, interacts differently.
Remember that great Pixar example where I think it was for Inside Out in the American version, she didn't like broccoli, but
Oh,
actually
yes.
broccoli's not a big issue in Asian markets, so they
Yeah.
replaced it with like peas or something else.
Yeah.
That's that type of context that even just direct translation doesn't get. But
Yeah.
you get that with these kind of multilingual, multinational models, which is really exciting.
Really cool. And it's actually launching later this summer, so this is happening really soon within the next couple of weeks. And it just represents a completely different version or vision
Mhm. Mhm.
for AI. And this is one where technology really serves the public good rather than shareholders. And I think that is what we need to be moving towards. And that is really exciting.
I think we all should be watching this very carefully.
Yeah, I agree.
It's great for the democratization of AI. It shows there are alternatives to just OpenAI, Google, or Meta or anything like that. This shows a marked improvement or a path to where we can have AI that you can control.
Yeah. And speaking of control and responsibility, we need to talk about something that shows that the flip side of that are AI gone wrong, really this week focusing on when AI gets used irresponsibly. And this week, our least favorite CEO got into hot water yet again for sharing AI generated deepfake videos of Scarlett Johansson and Taylor Swift. I don't know, if I were someone, I wouldn't want to go after Taylor Swift because she will come down on me like a ton
Her
of
Swiftie army is not to be messed with, man.
her Swiftie and her legal army.
Yeah.
And, I have to say that this story really perfectly illustrates why smaller businesses need to think carefully about the AI ethics and, why the initiatives like the Swiss model that we just talked about are so important.
Yeah, and the technical details of this are quite terrifying. So someone used AI to put celebrities' faces and voices into completely fabricated scenarios. The quality, though, was scary good. So we're talking deep fakes that could fool most people. I mean, in the past, they've always had this kind of like shiny aspect to it. These deep fakes started to remove a lot of that. So that's where it starts to get scary.
Yeah. And, we talked about this on our ethics episode because obviously this is specifically about celebrities, but it very easily could be, a CEO of your brand. But, also like Musk shared these on social media to his 200 million followers without any indication that these are AI generated. And, that's not just ethically questionable, it's super legally problematic. Like, it's just exactly the sort of thing that these really transparent open source models will help to address. But of course, with Elon Musk, he's like the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, and then it goes back to, we talk about everything needs to be transparent. So if you're using AI to generate content, whether it's images, videos, text, you need to be transparent about it. And some jurisdictions are starting to require AI disclosure labels.
Yeah. And, it's not just about legal compliance, it's about trust as well. Like trust, especially with AI at the minute, trust is incredibly important. If your customers feel like you've been or find out that you've been using AI to create content without telling them and they feel deceived, that's a relationship problem that's much harder to fix than a legal problem. We kind of talked about that a little bit with Sean.
Yeah, so a practical tip, if you're using AI for any customer facing content, especially images or videos, you might want to start adding a simple disclosure. This image was created with AI assistance, or this content was AI generated. Again, how do you increase your transparency? How do you build trust with your customers? This might be a good first step.
Yeah. And there's a broader lesson as well about consent and rights. These celebrities didn't consent to having their likenesses used by this way, as we say. Like Taylor Swift is probably going to come down like a ton of bricks. And for a smaller business, that means really careful about training AI on copyrighted materials or using people's images without permission. So if you're looking at doing something with a smaller language model and training, on your customer database, that's definitely something that you need to be conscious of.
Yeah. If you're using AI to generate marketing images, make sure you're not inadvertently copying someone else's style or likeness without their consent.
Yeah. And, it's the old saying, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. The technology might be there to allow you to do something, but that doesn't make it right or a smart business practice.
Yeah. And being ethical about AI is going to be a competitive advantage.
1000%.
So we all have access to these tools, but how you use them is incredibly important. So customers are getting more AI aware, and they appreciate businesses that are thoughtful and transparent about how you use the tools. Well, that's a perfect segue into our quick wins. So Jess, why don't you start us off?
Right. So quick win number 1 is the 15-minute FAQ bot. So with this, you want to go to chatbase.co. Again, we'll put all of these links in show notes. And you can join this on a free plan. You can drop your top frequently asked questions into a document. You can upload that, you name your bot, and then you hit test. And in 15 minutes, you'll know if the AI can handle half your customer support before launch. So really quick and easy way to dip your toe into a small language model and hopefully be able to remove that very time consuming customer support element that everyone hates.
I love this because it's so low risk, right? You're not really committing to much. It's on the free plan. You're just testing whether AI can actually help your business based on the data that you already have. Okay, here's another quick win you can try today that takes no coding, 5 minutes, very high level. So go to something called LM Studio. Again, we'll give you the notes for that. Download it, open it up, and in the Explore tab, grab a small instruct model. They actually have access to the new GPT OSS model, so you can try that small language model as well. Drop in something real from your business, some customer reviews, maybe some sales emails, a policy document, and ask it to give you 3 takeaways and 1 action this week. That's it. Your data stays on your laptop, so that's a privacy win. It's completely free to try, and you'll know in a few minutes if it can save you time on some of your business tasks. If you like it, you can flip on the local server later so other tools can then talk to the model. Do this today with 1 real snippet from your business and see if it saves you some time. If it does, you've got a repeatable win.
So quick win number 3, you can create an internal knowledge base for something like your employee onboarding. So you can use a site like Slite, SLITE.com, or Help Juice. Again, we'll put all of these links in the show notes. You can upload your employee handbook, your policies, your training documents, and then you can use that built-in AI assistant feature, which then will allow new employees to ask questions like, what's our holiday policy? Or how do I submit expenses? And get instant answers from your own documents, which is incredibly useful.
And the great news about all these tools is they're free for the most part, right? Up to a certain amount of, storage, or, a lot of them have free trials. So you can, drag and drop, test these out for a little while and see if it helps you, unlock and save you time.
Absolutely. And you literally can do all of this within an hour. And then that should just give your new employee a knowledge base that means that they're not constantly coming to you with questions that actually would take them 2 minutes to find. And it means that this assistant never gets tired of answering those same questions like, what's my holiday policy?
So pro tip, start small, sanity check the results, and then keep what works and iterate on it, right? Your challenge this week is to pick one of these quick wins, try it today, and see if it saves you time or leads to additional opportunities. You can do every single one of these. You can try small language models completely free or something that's, relatively speaking, dirt cheap.
Right, Kyle, let's wrap all of this up. So I think we can safely say that small language models are not just the future. They are available right now. They're really affordable, and they're really perfect for a lot of our listeners who are going to have smaller businesses or are going to have startups. The key is really about matching that right tool to the right task. And for many of our listeners, a small language model is really the perfect tool for their use cases.
And the barrier to entry is so low right now. So you can test most of this stuff for free in an afternoon using the trial or some of the limitations they have. So there's really no excuse not to at least try it.
And before we go, quick reminder, if you are enjoying the show, remember to please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. It genuinely helps other people find us, and hopefully, helps other small business owners or founders.
And until our next episode, go experiment with some small language models.
Thank you for listening to Early Adopter. We will see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.